Get ready with me while I tell you the story about how this boy once told me in school that he was going to rape me. When I was 13 years old, I was in school here in Nicaragua. I was very shy, I got bullied, and I never stood up for myself, like ever. I was petrified of standing up for myself because I thought it would just worsen things. But I have the best siblings on the planet, and they were the ones that stood up for me when I needed it because I just physically could not do that for myself. I got bullied a lot in school by boys and girls. This is really sick what I'm about to say. I was targeted by 12th graders when I was in 7th grade. That's sick. That is so sick. People would call my house. The moment I said hello, these people, I'm talking about boys, would say things like, watch out tomorrow in school because I'm gonna do something to you. I was petrified. I was so freaking scared. My mama was no dum-dums. She went to school and she started complaining about all the phone calls that I would get. And I knew some of the people that were making these phone calls, but I was too scared to tell. And I remember my mom sitting me down in the principal's office in front of the principal, and both of them just telling me, like, just tell us, just tell us. I did tell them about 2 people, and one of them was the 12th grader that kept calling me. Little did I know that there was another boy that was obsessed. You know, there's no other word to describe what he was. He was obsessed. Let's name him Jerry. Jerry was a grade above me, and he knew of me, of course, because we were in the same school. The school is small, by the way. This is Nicaragua. The school is small. It's not a huge high school like you picture in the US where like 3,000 people graduate in one class. No, there was about 30 of us in each class. Whenever a boy liked me, he would tell one of my friends so that she could tell me. I know this is gonna sound like, oh, cry me a river, boo-hoo, whatever. Let me tell you, I had a boy crushing on me every single week, and every single time that I got a letter from somebody or somebody was like trying to confess their love to me through MSN Messenger, like that's how old I am. I would start sweating, I would get so nervous, and I would just be like, oh God, no, here we go. Because it meant, this is what would happen when boys would tell me that they like me. Everyone would find out, right? So then the girl that liked them would get mad at me, and then I would get bullied by that girl. And then the boy who confessed that he liked me would harass me either on the phone or send me letters or follow me around in school. Like, it was like this weird freaking thing. And I know, I can't imagine I'm the only one that it happened to, of course not. But the truth is that I was singled out for a lot of reasons. I was always like in the talent shows, I was always dancing, I'm an actress. I mean, look at me, this is my job now. I love being in front of the camera. Does that mean that I like attention? Probably. I have an absentee father who abandoned my mom and my siblings and I when I was very young, so I'm sure that comes into play somehow. So Jerry decides to give me a letter one day, and he says to me, read it when you're alone. He said a lot of things in this letter. For example, he said that he wanted to rape me, and he would do it if I did not reciprocate the love that he felt for me. It's so messed up that I'm even saying that. His letter proceeds to say that he follows me around everywhere in school and that he's always watching me. My mom gave the letter to the principal, and as soon as the principal read the letter, she was pissed. I mean, so was my mom. I was getting mentally prepared for the barrage of hate and abuse that I might possibly get because I told on this kid. And I remember the principal coming to me, calling me into her office and just apologizing for everything that happened. And she said to me, don't worry, he's not here, and he might not be coming back. His parents agreed to take him away and get him help. But the thing is, this kid never came back to school. I felt guilty as a kid knowing that this boy was sent to that place. And now I wonder what happened to that guy. Like, or maybe he doesn't even remember, I don't know. Thank you for letting me trauma dump on you. And I know so many of you can probably relate. I know. Bye.
Story time about the girl who used me to get with my guy best friend. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 9th grade. Well, at the end of summer, right before school started, this girl named Liv added me on Snapchat. And I had seen her all around school. She was very popular and a little bit stuck up. But I added her back, and then I got a call on Snapchat from her. I answer very awkwardly, and I'm like, hi? And then she was like, oh, I've seen you in a lot of this guy's pictures. Are you guys like best friends? And I'm like, yeah, sort of. And she goes, have you ever thought about dating him? It was just an extremely weird, out of nowhere conversation. Anyway, so fast forward 2 weeks, I walk in the first day of school with my best friend Tommy, and Tommy and I have like every single class together. For some reason, Liv thought that we were friends and she would come and go as she pleased. Like Tommy and I would be standing at my locker, she would come over. Anyways, fast forward to chemistry. She walks in the class, winks at Tommy, like for part 2.
My husband forced me to watch him doing it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. I'm an overweight 28-year-old. My husband hates the fact that I'm fat. He and I dated for 2 years before he asked me to marry him. At this time, everything was pretty much okay. We had a lot of fun together, we were basically best friends. But after we got married, I ended up gaining some weight. Mostly because I wasn't really taking care of myself, and because I've never cared about gaining weight or not. But to my husband, this is horrible. After I gained 20 pounds, he started saying things like, "You're starting to look different and I don't like it. I can see your belly when we're having sex." And I gained another 20 pounds. And this is when he was really grossed out. If I asked him for a towel while I was showering, he would just throw it at me. Because apparently the sight of my naked body disgusted him. After a few weeks, I asked him to stop talking to me that way, and he said that he wouldn't because he didn't marry a fat woman. But I think he should love me no matter what. Even if I'm fat or skinny, he should still love me. He got to the point where he wouldn't even touch me or kiss me good morning or good night. And we used to have a pretty active sex life. Things got way worse. He started not coming home. Part 2 is up. My husband was so disgusted by my body that he couldn't stand the sight of me naked. This is when he stopped coming home some nights. The next day that he would finally arrive, he was always drunk and extra mean. I would ask him where he went, and he would say I was at the bar with my friends. And by friends, he meant his coworkers. And by coworkers, he meant his work wife. At this point, I had to take my makeup off, you guys, because it was way too cakey. Even my brother said it looked bad. I knew about my husband's work wife because at every work event, she was always there and she was always trying to be so nice to me. He would say things to me like, "Oh, he better be treating you right. You're so beautiful." But the whole time I know my husband's more attracted to her than me. This woman was really fit too. She loved the gym, and my husband and her had that in common. This is when I started becoming more and more jealous. Every time he stayed out with his friends, I would ask him where he went. Finally, he confessed one night that he had been hooking up with his coworker and that it served me right. He told me my body was so grotesque that he gagged every time he saw me naked. Yeah, my own husband is telling me that. But instead of reacting like a normal person and leaving him, I decided to get even fatter. I ended up gaining another 15 pounds. And this pissed him off even more. It made me happy to piss him off. Part 3 is up. My husband forced me to watch him do it with another woman. Disclaimer is not my story time, send me on Instagram. This is when I gained another 10 pounds just to piss him off. In retaliation, he started kicking me out of our bedroom at night. If I would get into bed, he would literally kick me off the bed. That's when he told me that I needed to go downstairs and work out, or at the very least, stop eating. At this point, I knew that he had been having an affair with his work wife. So I decided to ask him directly. He had no shame in telling me that he was having an affair with her. That's when he started saying things like, "Her body is way better than yours." He even said that he was more than happy to bring her over so that I could meet her. And that's what he did the very next day. He brought her to our house. I expected her to be on my side and tell him absolutely no. Instead, she started calling me names as soon as she came into our house. She started referring to me as the fatty. Suddenly, they started getting naked. And I just watched. Part of me couldn't believe it. I was frozen in time. While they were getting it on the couch, I was sitting there crying. The whole time my husband is calling me a pig. When they were done, they left. 2 days later, he asked me for a divorce. But I don't want to give it to him. He'll have to die married to me. What should I do?
Storytime about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him and my brothers. So a little background information, I was 13 years old and in 7th grade, and I had 2 older brothers, Josh and Alex, who were twins, and they were both 4 years older than me. Whenever I was 3, my dad left my mom for his dentist, and we never saw him again because he decided to start a whole new family with them. Now, because of that, my older brothers always felt like they had a specific role in my family, especially because the guys that my mom brought home, they would only last a week. Well, finally, my mom met this guy who's really nice, and she decided that she was going to get married to him, but he despised my older brothers. Mainly because before he moved in with us, my mom would not depend on him for anything. Anything that needed taken care of around the house, my brothers would do it. And we didn't have too much money while this guy was loaded. Like the one time my mom and this guy, who we're gonna call Jerry, got into a fight, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said, my mom and Jerry got into this one fight, and it's a super long story, but pretty much all it made Jerry realize was that he did not have authority over my mother, and she didn't have to depend on him for anything because my brothers would always be there for her. Now, Alex was more of the shy one. Meanwhile, Josh was super hot-headed and didn't deal with anybody's bullshit. And fast forward, my mom and Jerry move in together. That's when we realized that Jerry was super abusive. And Jerry knew that he could pick on Alex whenever he wanted because he wasn't going to do shit. And most of the time, Josh wasn't home because he literally hated Jerry. The one time Alex came home and he did really bad on this one test. And Jerry was like, oh, he needs to learn discipline, blah, blah, blah. The next day, we all were sitting down for breakfast and we saw Alex come downstairs with a black eye. And that's whenever Josh flipped the fuck out. He grabbed Jerry, ripped him across the fucking table, and threatened him with a kitchen knife. And my mom called the cops, like for part 3. Part 3 about how my stepdad made my mom choose between him or my brothers. So like I said he needed to teach some discipline, so he literally beat the shit out of Alex. And we all didn't know until he came downstairs the one morning for breakfast. And that's whenever Josh flipped the hell out. He threatened Jerry with a knife. After that, my mom called the cops. I didn't really do anything but try to de-escalate the situation. But after that, Jerry called a family meeting down to the kitchen table. And he was like, I will not deal with this level of disrespect in this house. He was like, you need to choose between me or them. She was like, well, I'm not going to choose between you or my kids. And he was like, well, then you need to choose them leaving the house. They're about to be 18. They can leave and get their own place. So my mom ended up choosing Jerry because Jerry had a lot of money. And my brothers weren't really that mad about it because it got them out of the house. And my mom would send them a lot of money every month. And Jerry never knew about it. But now instead of him being abusive towards my brothers, he's way more abusive towards my mom.
Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, wow, you're growing into your body, or wow, you got great hips. He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, ew. He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, oh, you know how he is. So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. That's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle.
Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I look back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, "Do you want to leave now?" And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.
Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, "Oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend." And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly, because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep, but he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, "Where are you? You're supposed to be home now." So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours.
My father-in-law is forcing my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup today. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Now, we did get married very, very young. By very young, I mean I was 18 and he was 19. When we started dating in high school, his dad was totally against the relationship. See, my husband was super popular. He played on the football team. All the girls chased him. He also played basketball and was perfect at everything he did. As you can imagine, was extremely strict with him. He was not even allowed to go out on weekends. Me, on the other hand, my parents are pretty much hippies. They let me do whatever I want. We're all very spiritual. My parents have full trust in me. Because of this, I make smart decisions. I actively seek my parents' advice. I even told my parents I lost my virginity when I did. And we had a big conversation about it. It was not dramatic. It was not like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." They just support me in everything I do. Now, my husband's parents are not the same. They tell him not to do a lot of things. They try to control him. So as we were dating in high school, his dad kept telling him to break up with me. He claimed that I was holding him back and that because of me, he spent less time training. Which technically, yes, is true. But at the same time, you cannot stop your son from experiencing human relationships. In fact, he actually broke up with me for 2 weeks. But then we got back together in secret. Everything culminated when he asked me to marry him right after graduation. His parents were absolutely against it. But my parents were all for it. You guessed it, go to part 2. My father-in-law wants my husband to break up with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. This is a 3-part story time and I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. When he asked me to marry him right out of high school, his parents absolutely freaked. They went to my parents' house and told me off for saying yes. In other words, they were completely blaming me for the whole thing. As if their own son didn't go buy a ring and ask me to marry him. He even did a beautiful proposal, which he had been planning for months. But at this point, his parents didn't even know that we were boyfriend and girlfriend. When they came to my house, his mom, my now mother-in-law, started crying and yelling at me. She told me that I was ruining their family, that I was trying to steal her son, and that all I really cared about was their money. By the way, my parents were middle class, but we were not destitute. His parents are very rich. They own several businesses. But of course, I'm not after their money. That's when they said that if we did end up getting married, I would have to sign a prenup. And I said, yeah, I want to marry him because I'm in love. At this point, his parents knew they couldn't stop us. We were going to get married with or without their approval. But thankfully, his parents came around and let us get married. We had a quaint, small wedding. It was so magical. But his parents wanted him to go to college to play football. In other words, they wanted him to be the next Tom Brady. They made him train for hours, and they didn't even let us live together for the first year we were married. And because they were supporting him, he couldn't say no. They had us on a schedule. Could only see him for about 2 to 3 hours a day. And we were married. 2 years later, he's playing for a football team. But his parents keep thinking that I'm dragging him down. So now they're trying to convince him to leave me. Go to part 3. My father-in-law is trying to convince my husband to divorce me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, and this is the final part of the 3-part story time. I'm doing a full face of pink makeup. After a year of us being married, his parents did not allow us to live together because he needed to focus on football. So obviously, I was living with my parents. I was focusing on my own studies, but his parents did allow us to see each other 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, you might think my husband is a total pushover, but let me explain something. His parents paid for all of his training and his entire college tuition. They gave him the best of everything. He got sports massages every single day. They even installed a cold plunge in their backyard. They also had a full gym setup where he and his teammates would go work out every single day. in their house. Obviously, he did not have time for little old me. After a year of this, I couldn't take anymore. I wanted to be with my husband. So I gave him an ultimatum. That he tell his parents that he and I wanted to live together. That's all I wanted. I was even willing to pay for half of the rent. And he told his parents, they said fine. And they bought us a house. Obviously under my husband's name, not mine. Fast forward another year up until now. I've heard his dad tell him on several occasions that he needs to divorce me. That he could find a much prettier wife once he becomes bigger in the NFL. And I walked in on his mom telling him that maybe I can't even have kids. And that he should have me checked. My parents-in-law hate me. I sometimes feel like I am holding him back. They make us miserable. My parents think I should just walk away from the marriage. But I'm too in love. Should I confront my parents-in-law? Help me think of what I should say to them.